So what we're going to do from here is create a file in our Git repository and add it to the staging area. And I try to start my projects with a readme.md file, just a normal markdown file. And the touch command will do that for me. It creates an empty file in my repository. So we'll do that, touch readme.md. And let's look in my folder and see if it's there. And indeed, it is. Hi, readme. Awesome. So the next command that I'm going to use is going to be the most common command probably that you'll use when you're learning Git. It tells you the state of things in your Git repository. And so I'm going to ask Git, what is the status of my repository? And it responds with state information about my repository. No commits yet, and there is an untracked file. And here it tells me nothing added to commit, but untracked files present, and use git add to track. So it's basically telling me what to do. So that is what I do. Add readme.md. And now when I run git status, it tells me that there are still no commits yet, but there are changes to be committed. The next thing we need to do is if we want to save this file in our repository history forever, we're going to make a commit. When you run a commit, you can provide a message, this -m, and we want to include a message to accompany the change to let other folks know what we did. So I'm going to call this initialized exercise 1 and hit return. Great. And we will see that one file has been changed and we haven't added anything to it. So there are 0 insertions and 0 deletions. And by running git status, I can see that there's nothing to commit, that my working tree is clean, and that I am in a good state. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to build an exercise for your course. And you're going to use the threefold model to understand the state of your repository. We'll walk through what it's like to use Git for your workflow. And let's start by putting some directions in for your students in this README. And we'll open up a text editor. I use Atom. And we'll close out of these welcome tabs. We don't need those, but now we're in the README. Good stuff. And I'm going to tell my students exercise 1. I'm going to say first, read through the slides in slides 1 and slides 2. I'm going to save that out and then switch back to my terminal. And I should also say that Git does not care about the content of your repository. It only tracks objects. It doesn't care if it's text, images, source code, whatever. It just saves the data appropriately. So we already saved the README file. The saving is very important. So let's ask Git about the status of our repository. All right, it will say that there are changes not staged for commit and that there is a modified README. All right. So something changed. What changed? To find out what changes are where, we can run a command called git diff. Git diff, it sounds obvious. It shows you the differences. And we can see that we've made some changes since our last commit. A few additions here in green. But when we run git diff, what two things are we comparing? Well, we're comparing the working directory to the staging area. And because the changes to the README aren't added to the staging area yet, it's showing the difference between my working directory and what was in the last commit. So if we go ahead and add the README, again, git add readme.md. Once we add the README to the staging area, what do you expect to see in the git diff? No output, because the two areas are the same. They're in sync when we added the README to the staging area. So let's go ahead and make another direction in our README. And we'll say second, answer the reflection questions at the end of slides 1. We'll save that out. Saving is very important. And we add our changes. So now if we run git diff -- staged, this is an option that lets us change the 2 points that we're comparing with git diff. Here we're going to compare what's in the staging area with what was in the last commit, which is also referred to as head from the repository. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go ahead and do that. Git diff -- staged. And you can see that our staging area has a few lines that don't exist in the repository history. And if we run the command git log, it shows a list of commits from where we're currently at, which is also referred to as head, always where we are on the current commit head, going back in history. And there's one commit in this history which just added the empty README file. So if git -- stage shows us that there are changes in the README file that exist in the staging area, that means that they're in our rough draft, our Manila folder that's not yet saved into our repository history. And now we do the last step, which is git commit, to save metadata to this file with a message, such as add basic info to README. And great, one file changed with 4 insertions. And when we run git status, we'll see that we're in a good state. And when we run git diff, there's no output. And when we run git diff -- staged, there's also no output because all 3 of those areas are in sync. Now, let's do another run through of working with the state of our repository. We've put things into the staging area and committed it, but we don't only have to go one direction. We can use the staging area as our rough draft and take files in and out. So let's create a few new files. We're going to create slides1.html and slides2. And when we run a git status, what do we expect to see? And if you guessed untracked, you were right. So I'm preparing for my new semester and I'm editing the HTML of my slides, but I only want to update slides-1 from last semester. So I can say git add slides1.html. And when we run git status, we can see that we have 1 new file and 1 untracked file. And this is where we can be selective. We can say, for example, I made a bunch of changes in my working area, but I only want to put certain things in the staging area and commit certain things. And why would we do this? Why would we isolate certain changes and commit them singly, one at a time? For instance, why shouldn't I fix a typo and add an example in the same commit? Well, because the change of the typo and the example are not related, and for someone else parsing your history, it's noise. And also in the future, if you want to undo that change, you don't want to reintroduce the typo. The idea here is that snapshots of your projects, the commits we're creating, should be atomic logical chunks. It doesn't need to be every new line you add, and different logical chunks for different projects can be different amounts. And some people learn to use git via the command git add dot. It's a command that takes everything from your working area and puts it into your staging area. I would like you to remove this from your vocabulary. Do not ever use this command, ever. But people do it, So we're going to walk through why you should never do this and you should actually use Git to be more selective. All right, here I go. I'm going to add everything into the staging area. Git add dot. So now everything is in staging, both of our slide files. But I realized that I accidentally posted solutions in slides-1 that have nothing to do with the README or slides-2. It doesn't belong committed with all three of those files. So if we use git reset and the file name, we'll move it back from the staging area into working so you can make logical, atomic commits to it. So git reset slides2 takes it out of the staging area and back into my working directory. Great. So I'm going to move back to the terminal and I'm going to run a git status. And the change that we just did, the addition of HTML, it happened in my working area, but the file itself was already in staging. So what do we expect Git to say? Is it going to say that there are changes that are unstaged? Is it going to say something else? What do we expect the state to be for slides-1? And it's a trick question because it's actually both. It's staged and it's not staged. How can this be? Well, let's use our git diff tool to understand better. So we're going to compare what's in slides-1 in the working area with what's in slides-1 in the staging area with a git diff. Okay, great. It's all that HTML. So what this is telling me is that in my working area on disk, there are all these lines that don't exist in my staging area. So what we basically have is a version of the file that is on staging and a different version of the file in our working area that is not staged. So this goes to show that we can actually add only certain parts of a file to the staging area. Or a better way to think about it is when you stage something, when you run the git add command, what you're doing is you're copying it from your working area, you're taking a photocopy of it, and you're putting it in the rough draft. And when you change the original, you don't change the copy. So let's see where we are. Great. We're in kind of a complicated state. We have one untracked file, that's slides2, and we have one set of modifications in our working area that are not staged, and we have a new file that is staged, slides-1. So there's an order of operations to commit these changes. First, we're going to commit the creation of slides1.html. Great. One file changed because it was just added. And then we're going to add our modifications to staging with git add. And I don't want to touch slides2, so we're just going to commit this, git commit key data from slides1.html. Now, if I run git status, I still have my slides2 and it's untracked, but that's what we want because we don't want to make any additional changes at this time.